Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Matches United podcast. I'm your host, as always, Phil Brown, joined with my regular co-host, the excellent James Rose. We didn't record last week. I was away on a short break, but a lot has happened since then. How you doing, my friend?
Yeah, doing pretty good. Enjoying the summer break and the Euros and the Copa America and all of that. It's been some entertaining stuff for sure.
Oh, it's been some really good games. I was quite cynical about the Euros when it first started.
Mm,
Um, I'm indifferent about international football, as I've said many times, but I have to say it's been quite entertaining. I've enjoyed a lot of the games. I made the mistake of watching the Mexico game last night, which they've been horrendous to watch. A
yeah,
country with
really
such a
bad.
rich football and culture still
Yep.
doesn't save you. It's not enough. But other than that, lots of United news. Of course, since the last time we spoke, as we are recording this podcast, the news of Dan Ashworth has broken that United have agreed his terms of his departure. Ruud van
Yep.
Nistelrooy returning, Rennie Hacker. I have no idea who it is, but they're return. But he's coming to United. A few more Dutch guys at the background. Of course, lots of transfer rumors, which we talk about direct. Ugarte, a few other things that are going on. First of all, Dan Ashworth, man, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean it's good. It's great, right? Because what we've always wanted is the right people in place making these decisions. These are the right people. He is an extremely qualified individual for this. There's absolutely no doubt about that with the experience and everything. I mean, he had his little email flub, I guess, but I don't think it actually particularly mattered in the end, to be honest. I think it was just a bit of the story that goes into the saga of Dan Ashworth. But a real qualified individual, and they wanted him in here. Omar Barada starting in 12 or 13 days as well,
Mm,
officially. Um, they've come, but I think ideally they would have had him earlier on. They wanted him to lead on the things, with the manager, all of that happened. I think would have been a lot smoother had they had him in earlier. Um, it's not too late, on the transfer front for him to oversee it, be involved in it, get business done, and it's kind of a key time now. It's July 1st. There's no signings, but a bit of a different window than we're used to, I think, with some of the things that have happened. But it's great. I mean, look, if we have Barada and Ashworth and Wilcox running the show, that's three more qualified people than we've had since Sir Alex left, which was
now, of
zero.
course,
So
my assumption was that Newcastle would drag this Ashworth thing out.
yeah,
But I guess in other way, it shows just how impeding PSR really is to these football clubs and
yep,
how if there's money on the table, they have to take it. I mean, there's talk about Dubravka going to Celtic. Celtic offered 2 million, Newcastle want 3. These were differences that never would have impeded any type of movement or
yep,
transfer, and it just shows you how tight these margins really are. It's going to be interesting to see how this gets managed going forward because we're seeing quite ridiculous things going on. Young Minte going for 33 million to Brighton. Um, might be a bright young talent, but these player valuations make absolutely no sense. So I think we're seeing a lot of skullduggery going on before January 1st, which I don't know how you regulate this, James. This is the problem with regulation. It's always a step behind because it's always on the defense. It's always trying to react to
yeah.
what the rule benders are. At a bit later in this podcast, I want to touch on Jim Ratcliffe's interview where he talked about concentration of power through the Big Six, which I have to say, if that was to leave the mouth of a Joe Glazer, I think would have landed very differently. But we'll get to that a little bit later. um, but yeah, look, it's very encouraging that they've been able to get Dan Ashworth in, a key appointment that a lot of other lower level appointments depend on. But
Yep.
let me ask you about this coaching restructure because it looks like Mitchell van der Gaag is going to leave. One of the things that we have brought up numerous times on this podcast is the fact that van der Gaag, personality-wise, is very similar to Ten Hag.
Yeah.
And for players, you need a bit of good cap backup. You need someone that is not, as I said, the purview of the manager, but he is, or still inside the purview of the manager, but someone that could deal with you differently in
Yep.
different ways that the manager will. That has always been a successful counterbalance, between two different people um, that are in managerial positions. Ruud van Nistelrooy knows the football club. Um, I don't know if he's the personality. He's a very good coach. Obviously, I'm a bit surprised he took an assistant job, but
Mm.
it'd be interesting to see how this dynamic works.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, we talked about it a lot because there's certainly a lot of valid concerns with regards to players and how they dealt with the coaching staff and how they get along. And that's not a matter of player power, things like that people get into, but just a matter of making a harmonious environment in a harmonious dressing room. I mean, there's stories back, of course, in the day about how Sir Alex wouldn't get on Ronaldo so heavily because he couldn't take it in the same way that players like Wayne Rooney and others could. And you treat people differently based on how what gets the most out of them, because your purpose is not to beat them down, your purpose is not to make less of them, your purpose is to get them to improve and to create a response, a positive reaction to what you're doing, to change some type of behavior, to improve some type of behavior, to improve confidence. And some people deal with these types of things in different ways. Some people want to be heavily challenged. They thrive in an environment that's like really intense, and some need a soft touch. And as you said, it was there was a lot that there was really no differences, and that's where your assistants come into play, is giving people an ear, someone they can go talk to, someone they can raise concerns to, someone that they can speak to, where it's not undermining the manager or anything like that, but simply helping to align. And you always have to have open communication. You can't rule with an iron fist and not allow people to bring up concerns. You run any kind of group of any of or team in a business or anything like that, it just doesn't work, as much as it might seem nice to be an absolute ruler. And I think this is a bit of a reshuffle in saying, acknowledging that it wasn't good enough last year, and that these issues that have been brought up are very real, and that taking the feedback from players and taking the assessments that everybody has made in there, that there were real issues that need to be solved. And one of those was with assistance and improving the communication, improving the support staff with Ten Hag. And as far as I'm led to believe, he's very, very on board with this too, and I think that's why you're seeing it, of course, being Dutch coaches, which is people that he would accept. I think it's going to be the type of thing where it says, it's these are all his picks and all that because they're Dutch and everything. I'm not 100% sure that that's the case, that both were his pick. I think that it's very likely that there were certain suggestions with regards to Ineos and leadership on changing assistants. We know they'd already suggested that prior in the year and been looking into it. So they may have come up and said, we want someone with this experience, with this level. Here are some options we're thinking of, who works for you. And then he chose which one he wanted, and then maybe, pick somebody else himself. But Van Nistelrooy, being someone with the Premier League experience, someone who has very good English as well, which I do think matters, a very good mastery of the language, would be helpful. Experience within the club, experience within the league, obviously for so many reasons, a big help in a way that perhaps Michael Carrick was as well when he was there. So, yeah, I don't know anything about the other guy, so I can only say that this seems like a good appointment, and it is interesting that both were head coaches in the past. You don't usually see that.
I think it all depends on who hired him.
Yeah.
So if Ten Hag pushed for Van Nistelrooy, then Van Nistelrooy works for Ten Hag.
Right.
If Ten Hag was pushed into accepting Van Nistelrooy, then Van Nistelrooy doesn't work for Ten Hag.
Right.
And there's going to be a issue with trust there. I mean, certainly Ferguson wouldn't have allowed United to impose an assistant on him.
Mhm.
And that would have been true of most top managers. They wouldn't have allowed an assistant to be pushed on them. It would have been my team where we go.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what. the dynamic is here. So if Ten Hag appointed Van Nistelrooy, then fine. But here's the thing about that: Ruud van Nistelrooy is very, very popular with United fans. He has a track record in coaching where
Mhm.
he was successful. Ruud van Nistelrooy is going to cast a huge shadow over
Yep.
Eric Ten Hag. Um, when it comes to things like if there's dodgy results, or if you have a poor performance, it's going to be very tempting for United fans to look in Ruud van Nistelrooy's direction. So to me, um, how Van Nistelrooy responds to that all depends on who he works for. So I would hope that this was an Eric Ten Hag suggestion, that this was something that wasn't enforced, because I think that an assistant to a manager is very, very important. Whilst he has to have a different personality that connects with players in a different way, he also has to have the complete trust of his manager. And I think if you've got an assistant manager working for a manager who doesn't actually work for the manager, if you know what I mean, that's
Mhm.
difficult. That's a difficult dynamic to make work.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the complication of it is obviously that with everything that happened through the year, with I mean, it is
Have you ever been
complicated.
in a job and you've asked to train your replacement?
Yeah, I
Right?
know, I know, I know. It's happened to
We all know
people.
it's
I
like
know.
I'm training someone. I'm training this. I'm training this. But I to get up and eat me. I mean, it has a bit of that feeling.
Yeah, I know, it does, and I don't wanna suggest that even because, like, uh, it's this is a tricky thing to communicate because, like, I'll just say it this way. From United's perspective, they're gonna 100% want it to be all Ten Hag, right?
Of
That this
course.
was all Ten Hag, that these are his guys, his coaching staff. I'm not saying that that isn't necessarily the case, um, because as far as I gather it, there was a lot of agreement between everybody on this. But this idea started months ago when they were still thinking about replacing Ten Hag, of getting an assistant in and switching this all up. You know, there's the stories about approaching Gary O'Neill and all of that, and getting someone with Premier League experience in. That has been a story for a long time. So you can't really just be Ten Hag's, thing on this. That being said, I think that it's really interesting because reportedly Ten Hag was very loyal to Van der Gaag as well, and they paid a lot of money to bring him in. 2 million for an assistant coach, I think back in the day. That's a lot of money when they hired him. Um, but I think that this is sort of the finding compromise and common ground where you're saying, um, if Ten Hag wants to stay in the position and have his best chance of success, these are some of the things the Ineos are going to want. They're going to want to change areas where they feel are not working. Now, whether that works out or not, I'm not sure. We'll obviously have to see, but it is a little bit awkward because you already see when it gets posted online, and you see on Twitter and in the comments and things, a lot of people reading into it as a succession plan, as a backup plan. And it's a little hard to get around that because you're going to have a really hard time suggesting with people buying it 100% that there is nothing in hiring someone like Van Nistelrooy in there and thinking about it, that it could be a succession plan if things go wrong. It's going to be really hard to convince people that that's not the case. Obviously, the internal dynamics matter more, but you're correct. I mean, you lose games, there will be outcry for, hey, we've got somebody ready made to take over. And to be fair, it makes a lot of sense having an interim who's actually qualified if you needed it.
No, I think from a strategic point of view, it makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
because he is a potential replacement. If Arne Slot a replacement for Jurgen Klopp, why couldn't you have contingency planning with someone like Ruud van Nistelrooy? It's say, look, when you look at the probabilities, how probable is it that Ten Hag's going to have an amazing season next season where his job's not going to be in question? That's not.
Right.
It's possible, but not highly probable to me. Still,
Yep.
so much work that needs to be done. So it is
Yep.
important that if you look at the clubs that Dan Ashworth has worked with and all these other progressive clubs, they have continuity plans. They have contingency plans. They know exactly what they're going to do if this guy leaves.
Yep.
I remember listening to Les Reed talk about this when he used to run Southampton, when they had a tremendous reputation back when Pochettino was there,
Yeah.
and they were always talking about their contingency planning. and they would say, look, we know even when we appoint a manager, if he doesn't work, if he leaves, who we have in line as strong consideration for their replacement. I think that's really, really important. That's what happens when
Yeah.
you have a consistent embedded identity from top down that says, okay, we can now have coaches as well as players that with the similar mindset that wants to play this way. So I'm not against it, and obviously emotionally and sentimentality. I love the fact that Van Nistelrooy's back at United. I mean,
Yep.
probably the best finisher I've ever seen in my lifetime at
Yeah.
United, and genuinely was brokenhearted when he left.
And we could use a
Haggai,
little bit of that magic,
yeah, we
couldn't
sure
we?
did. Haggai, don't only Haggai, I'm pronounced his name right. What's really funny is that I saw a couple of clips on social media saying this is what we need in our players. Do people think that's not happening in United's dressing room? Do people think that those ball tunes, those bulletins aren't
I
happening
know,
right
I
now and
know,
haven't been
I
happening for
know.
years? I mean, do you think that that's all it takes? This probably has been going on in United's dressing room consistently for years. I mean,
Mhm.
Solskjaer's throwing wobblers, Ranić did. Ten Hag has done it many, many times. This is something that happens all the time.
I
But
know, it is funny.
but nonetheless, these are quality appointments. These are people with coaching track record, with track record of being the number one, being the head coach that understands how to connect with people, and understands that there's issues that Ten Hag's going through, and I think with Van Nistelrooy, you get Premier League experience that maybe Mitchell van der Gaag didn't have. Um, One of the other slight areas of concern for me, if I was Ten Hag, I would have again is Van Nistelrooy's relationship with Ferguson.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you have to think of that because obviously Sir Alex is still director of the club and is still very influential at a high level. Somebody who obviously Sir Jim has had a lot of discussions with, and I'm not saying he's leading decisions and all of that, but look, it's true. I mean, one way or another, and maybe this is a good thing for everybody involved. Um, you have to look at Ten Hag's position and say that he's had a lot of power removed from where he is, and that might be a good thing for everybody. Maybe it takes the pressure off a little bit, maybe allows him to focus on things a bit more, but all the people who hired him are gone, and the assistant that has been brought in is somebody with incredibly strong relations with the club that is more likely to outlast him if something goes wrong, and with Sir Alex and all of that. So certainly, like, I'm not saying this is even a bad setup because a lot of this is just logical and it's a part of the modern game, lining up alternatives, lining up succession plans, having these things in mind, having good people in the place where even club appointed coaches are pretty normal these days, right? Where you get assistants who are club appointed, where even when you bring someone in, they stay and they continue to work with them. And so you get a little bit more continuity. And so all of that can be good for United in the long term. But yeah, I mean, Ten Hag's going to have to do really well. But isn't that really the case anyway? I mean, he's got to do well next season.
Yeah, no, he has to do well. I mean, whether Van
Yeah.
Nistelrooy's there or not, there's going to be
Yeah.
someone that's going to be fetishized and linked with his job no matter what. So, this
Yeah.
really is the point where he has to deliver. On that, there's a responsibility for the people that run the club to also deliver for him
Yeah.
and to make
Yeah.
sure that he's given the players that he needs to play the way they want and to bring the success that that is expected of him. We said 2 weeks ago in this podcast that if we were still recording this in a couple of weeks, there was still no players activity in or out, I'd be concerned. I'm not as concerned as I thought I would be. I'm sort of indifferent to it. I think United will get business done. Um, there's a lot of certainty and uncertainty over how close they are with targets and how far away they are and how serious they are about certain targets. I think it's good that United are working on multiple different deals at the same
Mhm.
time, which is exactly what they should be doing. But let's go through some of those, Matthias Delict.
Yeah, interesting one because obviously he was confirmed to be a little bit lower down the list of things, and that doesn't make him a bad signing should they make him. Most clubs move down their lists. They don't always get the top targets, no matter how it's kind of painted. But there's, it's kind of funny that we end up in a situation after everything where we're once again talking about a player who is, of course, formerly one of Ten Hag's main
Mhm.
links, and players that he's known for. Starting with, Frankie de Jong and Matthias de Ligt were the two main standout names from that Ajax team in that deep Champions League run. That being said, I know some people who think of my opinions will think I'll immediately suggest that means it's entirely Ten Hag driven or something like that, but that's not really the case. He's been on United's radar for a long time, and they were even interested in signing him all the way back then, 5 years ago. And it's sort of a funny story because his transfer and the rumors around it itself is actually when I started doing the whole Muppetiers thing in the first place with some.
Mm.
It's kind of a funny time, and they've liked him for a long time. Some of the positives I would say about Matthias de Ligt are mentality wise, he's always been someone who's very strong, a leader. And I would say, mentally matches more like Lissandro Martinez, who has been a Ten Hag signing that has worked out extremely well for United and is an incredible player. That is a top talent. Matthias de Ligt is very good. He's been at big clubs, Juventus, Bayern Munich. Concerns I would have would be he's got a bit of a spotty injury history in the last season, which United can ill afford right now. He's on very significant wages and like 280,000 a week in pounds. Um, Bayern, I get very nervous every time Bayern are
Mhm.
trying to sell someone. It's like a huge red flag to me, especially when they're coming off of injuries. How many times have we seen them do that? And there's a reason that they're selling, and maybe there isn't. Apparently, their fans are unhappy that he's going. It has a lot to do with Vincent Company coming in. But why? Why is he pushing him out for preferring Eric Dyer and Jonathan Tah? These are red flags. They're not.
I think they signed
It's,
a Japanese lad too, didn't they? They
yeah,
signed
yeah,
a couple of players
and they
there.
have Kim and Jay, and then they're signing somebody. They're looking at a few others, and it's just but it's weird. It's a little bit weird. It's just it's an oddity why they're kind of pushing him out the door a little bit, and he wants to move. Now, as I understand it, he was down below. They missed on Tosin as a free agent. Toribo was blocked by the FA. We haven't discussed that. I think that happened in the
Mm.
last 2 weeks that came out, or not the FA, but UEFA over the multiple club competitions thing, which seems a bit ridiculous to me, given the way that City have subverted those rules by going through smaller clubs and all of that. It is a bit ridiculous, but that was blocked. Lenny Yoro, who they really like, another exciting player. There's a lot of reports that he's just going to end up at Madrid, which was kind of expected. Um, Supposedly separate to Braithwaite, who we can talk about, but it's pretty difficult to spend that much money on both if you're going to go for both without significant sales. But I think one of the reasons he became viable is United got the idea that his fee wouldn't be so high as 60, 70 million like it might have been before, and that maybe his wages would be more reasonable. He'd be open to joining. And so he's named down the list that's moved up the list if United have had to widen after missing on other players. And it seems like it's a fairly viable deal should Bayern be willing to accept a reasonable fee for him.
And also, I mean, I was reading some of the Dutch media on this. They're going on it quite big.
Yes.
They believe that deal will happen and that it's not that far
Yeah.
away. And that I don't know anything about it, so I can't say anything either way with any certainty. But yeah, look, if you look for reasons to be concerned, why would Juventus want to get rid of a young centre back? Why would Bayern Munich still want to get rid of a young centre
Yeah.
back? It seems odd to me. He's been there 2
He's
years
only
that they're already
24. Yeah.
wanting to move him on.
Yeah.
Um, you know, if you'd have signed him from Ajax, I would have been really excited because he was an exceptional
Yeah.
young talent. But
Yep.
kind of concerns me that two clubs have basically binned him after 2 years, moved him
Yeah.
on. But at this point, James, if you need to go for him, Ten Hag can't take responsibility, in my opinion, because these are club decisions now.
It
Whether
is.
he
Yeah.
wants them or not, this is why
Yep.
Jason Wilcox is here. They have the right to say no. This is why
Hmm.
the sporting department's here. So they have to be in agreement that this is the right target. It seems to
And Dan
me,
Ashworth is here now too, so he's going to be involved in the final decisions. Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me when I'm looking at two out of three United's main targets this summer are Dutch that There really isn't any difference. I'm always always, which is fine. I don't care. I don't care where they're from personally. But obviously Xerxes is another and Ugarte. Look, the one of the reports was Delict was not an alternative to Branthwaite, but in addition to
Mhm.
Branthwaite. When United still need to sell players, and they still look
Yep.
nowhere near being able to do that. Casemiro, we don't know.
Yep.
Sancho, no, there's no serious offer on the table. Mason Greenwood, they're still nowhere near. I mean, things could happen quickly now. We're about to hit July, or in July, um, but it doesn't look like any outcomes are close.
Yeah, and that would be the kind of concerning part of this because, like you said, I had the same thought when the report came out from Ornstein, who's obviously like the best in the business on this stuff, saying
Mm-hmm.
it's independent of Braithwaite. I'm looking at it and going, well, they got to sell a lot if for them to get two, because yeah, you can make some good money on Harry Maguire for one, and he might
But
be the
wouldn't
most
Lindelof
saleable.
and Wan-Bissaka be the most likely of the
Well,
back four?
yeah, but they're not worth that much. That's, I
No.
think, part of the issue. Harry Maguire had a really good season. I think he had a bounce back season, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
he's older, but he's on an upward trajectory, and I think he's a player where you look at him and say he starts for most teams in the Premier League. England international, he would be there if not for injury. Um, had a good season. He would start for most clubs in the Premier League for sure. Probably 16 of them, 15 of them maybe. And you look at that and think, yeah, well, that one makes sense. And they bought him 5 years ago now, so his book value is low. They've paid most of it off. If they could sell him for 30 million, 35 million, which they were close to last season, and I think he's been better since then you get a significant profit out of that, and he's on pretty significant wages too, and that would allow you to make this move. The other reason I mentioned Harry Maguire is that he is similar to Delit. And that's my other concern with that deal in particular is that, like, you had a dynamic, right, with Lissandro and Rafael Varane, which worked really well, which was actually pretty similar to the dynamic of Sergio Ramos and Rafael Varane, which is one of them being hyper aggressive, right? Like this guy, he's going to
Mm-hmm.
get in there and, your Vidic types, right? And then you have the alternative, which is the fast, tall sweeper, center back cleaning up behind him, and that was your Rio Ferdinand or your Rafael Varane. And you don't have that dynamic with Maguire and Lissandro, which is why they haven't played together much because they both are on the front foot. And it's the same with Delit. He's on the front foot. So I'm a little confused how you fit them all together when they're all going
Mm-hmm.
to be playing on the front foot and nobody's got really that catch up pace to get back, to sweep, to clean up behind when people are breaking through. And we saw how bad we were in transition last year. That's my concern. So to me, it makes more sense to move on than Harry Maguire, bring in a Braithwaite, because in a lot of ways, he's similar to that. Tall, very fast, young, agile, and that's where he excels in at this point in time, is defending those spaces. That's where he'd be the best at, and would develop into. Lenny Yoro fit that category of like a Varane regen in terms of how he plays. So I don't know. If they sell Lindelof, there's interest from Turkey, but what are you going to get for him? 6-8 million. They didn't get much for Fred. He's in a similar age bracket. Worse at this point in time in terms of how many minutes he's played. Fred had actually a pretty decent season prior to being sold, so I don't see how you get a lot of money that's going to allow you to fund that without moving on Harry Maguire, and that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, no, I agree. You still have the left back issue. So, I mean,
Yep.
if you're talking about two centre backs, defensive midfielder, striker, plus a left back, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And if Wan-Bissaka goes, you're going to need a right back. Um, and without major sales, and I have to be honest, like I would be surprised. I'm trying to think of where Jadon Sancho could go for that money.
Saudi.
Um, but I mean, even Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia. I mean, why? There should be a club in Europe that could pay
Mm.
40 million for someone like Sancho, and see him at Greenwood. I mean, I don't know. It's going to be interesting, but I think that that's the bare minimum United need. They're
Mm.
looking at a
Yeah.
guard thing. Now they've looked at Ugarte before. They looked at it. They
Yes.
liked him before he went to PSG. We talked about this
Yes.
on this podcast before. I think PSG would be willing to do a loan deal with an option to buy at the end of the season, which I think would work for United. That would allow them to spread that cost out, of course, and maybe give you a look at the player because he hasn't been an ever present in PSG's midfield this season.
No.
So you'll have to see how he adapts. Good player, but he's young, he's the right age,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's still a lot of uncertainties around him. So I think a loan option, if you need to get a loan option with an option to buy, would be a great deal for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be ideal, right? Is to get a try before you buy type of thing with him. Um, if PSG aren't open to that, he might fall into it. And I think this applies to Brent to Delit as well in terms of why they're becoming more options. Is if they feel like they can get a deal done in that 35 to 40 million range. I think that's this year United's kind of sweet spot for spending on players, where they'd like to bring in players in that level because they're not as big of risks, at that level. And if you're getting them on good wages and you like them, they're not as big risks. They don't have that huge book value that lasts forever. If you need to move them on later, but City did that a lot, and I think that's a big part of the Barada influences.
But it's hard to get top class players in that price bracket, James.
I know, but we look at like the summer here, and we look at the offer for Braithwaite, 35 plus 8. It's not a lot of money. That's not a big offer. It certainly doesn't come close to what they wanted. But that may have been all they had in June for him. They haven't made any other offers in June, and the PSR position up to June 30th was, I think, really, really tight because you had this really bad loss a few years ago that falls off now. But it seems like that's the position that they're in when you look at it. Xerxes, 35 million, 33 million release clause. Ugarte, the price kind of in between based on the reports is somewhere around 35 to 40 if they want to buy him. And Delit, I think he's 42 million pounds is the asking price from Bayern. So they're going to be looking to get that a little lower. So they're really, everyone they're looking at is in that range. If you go for the left back, the Hungarian kid, Kirkus, I think he's going to be in the same price range, 35
Okay,
to
but
40
let's say you
million.
send
Yeah.
those players, right?
Yeah.
None of those players would be in a conversation for top class, right? I mean,
Not at this point. Yeah, they're young, but not at this point. Yeah, there's question
yeah,
marks, I think,
Mama
over all of
Ugarte
them.
has never
Yeah.
proven that. Maybe
Yeah.
Xerxes, I would hazard a guess that most people didn't know who Xerxes was at the start of last season, unless you play video games or
Most
whatever,
likely.
right?
Yeah.
So is it fair to then say to your manager, not go win the league?
Definitely
Or go
not. And I
compete for
don't,
the league
yeah.
title, or go compete with
Yeah.
Man City when I'm giving you 3 players, one of whom has been moved on by 2 top clubs in the last
Mm-hmm.
4 years.
Yep.
Another of whom plays for Bologna, who was
Yep.
also moved on for Bayern Munich, and another whom can't get in PSG's midfield every week. I would imagine if he was top level, PSG wouldn't allow him on a loan option to buy. They keep him. And then Kirkis, who plays for Bournemouth, saying, "Okay, now go compete with Man City for the league." I mean, I don't know. You have to be fair. Is that the level? I understand where United are financially. I understand that signing world class players at the moment is difficult, but you know if Jim Ratcliffe was talking about wanting to be where Real Madrid is in 3 years, you've got to do a lot in 3 years. I mean,
Yeah,
they've
for
they,
sure.
they just brought in Endrick and Mbappe.
Yeah.
I mean, Articular. I mean, the quality they have is outrageous. And then
Mm-hmm.
the other question then becomes: is that enough to convince the likes of Bruno Fernandes about your ambition?
Right.
Because these are serious questions that have to be answered. I
Yep.
mean, I've been criticized because of some of my criticism towards Ineos. Feelings towards them are all over the map. My view is they should be held to exactly the same standard that anyone else is, and it's very easy to overlook certain things because you're emotionally committed to them being different. So
Yep.
you can have blind spots. The way they treated the women's team was unacceptable,
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
unacceptable. that they lost Mary Earps as a result of it, and that they never treated the women's team with the level of respect that they deserve. They're not
Uh,
perfect. I don't think
yeah.
Jim Ratcliffe should be doing interviews complaining about the fact that the top six don't have a concentration of power. I don't like that, James. I don't like that mindset that because we make more money, we should be able to tell everyone else what to do. If that came out of the mouth of Joe Glazer, he would have been slaughtered, and rightly so. United didn't even finish in the top six, Jim. Worry about that first. Okay? Then worrying about the revenue generating clubs. Let's get your team into the top six so that you can earn that on merit, and then we can talk about that. Because quite
Yep.
frankly, the top six to me are the top six teams that finish there, not the top six teams that generate revenue. Right? That's great if you're a
Yep.
business. But if you're a football fan, let's talk about finishing in the top six. Because, anyway, there's a lot of positives,
Yep.
and I think it's great that we have a football team, a football department with qualified people running the football club, and I've no doubt that any of us will get things wrong. Everyone does. They won't be perfect. They'll make mistakes. But what on the positive side, we finally have owners who have financial investment or in success on the pitch, which will obviously drive how they run the football club. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be criticized when it's due.
Yeah, agreed. And look, it's a challenging discussion because like I think that in some aspects of everything, they deserve for sure the benefit of the doubt. Like we've talked about many times, they don't you don't turn around this many years of mismanagement at United, especially on the pitch, overnight for sure. And their strategy is obviously to uh, build young and kind of almost start over a little bit, right? And that's difficult. You got to get it right. It can work out really well. You can get where you need to be that way, and that's clearly the strategy on transfers. I think one could ask the question: is it because they're not confident yet in the direction of everything, that they don't want to go and spend big money on players at this point in time? Maybe it is. Maybe they're thinking, get these sort of lower risk deals, younger players get their feet under the desk, get Ashworth and them a year to get going, and then they can make bigger moves. Maybe they're right in that, maybe they're not, but obviously we're going to have to see how that pans out and measure
Yeah,
it based on the season, you
there's no
know?
cheat code. There's no cheat code to get back to the top. This is
Yeah.
why City
Yeah.
financially helped. Okay,
Yeah.
because they knew that you can sign 11, 18 of the best young players in the world that will not get you back to the top.
Yep.
You have to
Yep.
balance that with world class players.
Yeah.
So
And
look at the teams that are winning European Cups. They're not
yeah.
doing it with 11 kids. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe you get an anomaly of Ajax every once in a while, but the
Yep.
concentration of power and dominance is centered towards the clubs that send the best players. This is almost that,
Yep.
right? So, I understand United invested in youth because you have to do that to a degree, but that has to be balanced with world class players in their prime because youth has to be led. They have to learn by example. They have to learn from players they trust. They have to, so, you know, Arsenal tried this when they couldn't compete, and they would lose top players and they'd go out and sign young players. But as soon as those players reached the level of maturation, they lost them.
Mhm.
Fabregas left, all these players, Ashley Cole and all that, there,
Yep.
and they left because they Arsenal were a team for you to develop at, not to win it.
Yep. Yep.
But this is where any of us have to get this balance right. And I'm not against going for young players. I think that is important because you have to invest in your future. But the teams that solely invest in young players are the teams that are finishing where United finished, the Brightons, right?
Yep.
You're going to finish around 7 or 8 if you get it perfect, right? The problem with a club like United is it's not analogous to a club like Brighton because at Brighton, if you lose 3-4 games, that's expected. United, you lose 2-3 games, and you're going to have dickheads all over the internet calling you a fraud, an arsehole, you're shit, you ain't it,
Mhm.
bruv, all this nonsense, right? Because you're not allowed to buy a game at United if you're a young player ever. or
Yeah.
you're immediately shit. You could score 1,000 overhead kicks in a row. You have one bad game, and just what? Oh, he's a fraud. He's finally
I mean,
found out
look,
all this teenage stuff.
Rasmus Højlund has been getting an
Yes,
enormous
this
amount
good.
of
I'm
criticism
pretty sure Bayern
online.
Munich weren't thinking about replacing
Yeah,
Harry Kane yesterday if he hadn't scored. How was his
yeah,
tournament going? How's Mbappe's going, by the way? But
yeah,
this is they don't even play for United, and they're getting rinsed by the
yeah,
so-called United supporters. Man, it doesn't take much to
yeah,
be identified as one. But this is the difference: is that you come to a club like United, these people have no idea about football, but
yeah,
collectively, they're a very loud voice. And if you're a young player with access to social media and you're watching, you know, people level abuse at you because you've had a bad
yep,
game,
yep.
I mean, you don't get that at Brighton. You don't get that at Bournemouth. You don't get they get left
Yeah,
alone
you
to
get a lot more
develop because
time.
the
There's no
pressure
doubt
at
about
United is
that.
massive.
Yeah, yeah. No, for sure. And look, this is the risk involved, but I also do, of course, think it's where they're at, and that's why I can see something like a Delit, who is someone who was extremely highly rated, and you're kind of looking at him and saying, if you can get him bouncing back to the trajectory he was on, then you can get a potentially world class player in there, on a better deal, and you're
This
giving him
is
the
where you're
best
at.
chance.
This is where you're at. You're in the damaged goods territory in the
Yeah,
hope that you can you're not buying players that you don't have to get back to the
I
top. Already at
agree.
the top. Now out the
I
players have
agree.
got a little flaw here, got a few dents in the
But that's
bumper, and
that
they
is
got to
the
fix them,
club,
buff them out.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
and the again to get that right is really difficult
yeah.
because the probability that they're all of a sudden going to fix the reason why they're in the damaged goods territory United is not high. Now
Yeah.
that can be done. It was done, Canton as an example, where you can pick up a player where all of a sudden, right club, right place, right everything
Yep.
falls into place.
Yep.
Um, but there's a lot of alternative examples, and I just think this is where it gets a bit risky. Where now you're starting to rely on players that 25 had a bumpy career, and what's the likelihood that you're going to get something out of them? Juventus or Bayern Munich don't get out of them. I mean, I don't know. You know, I'm not completely against the lict. Branthwaite has at least had a year in the Premier League. You know what you're
Mm-hmm.
getting there. He'll cost a little more for a reason. And
Yep.
the next step in his potential is undetermined whether he makes it or
Yeah,
not.
for sure.
So
For sure.
it's yeah, it's a hard one to get right.
Yeah, it is. And obviously they do have to get it right. They don't have endless funds and endless ability to do it. We can't do more windows of players that don't work out. But it seems like overall the view is that it's about the environment, fixing the environment, why they failed with so many players so far, why they're failing with players like Bruno and Rashford, who, are senior players that can keep and drag a team up, but you got to keep them happy too, and that's part of it. You got to keep them willing to stay, because the more of those types of players that leave, the less chance you have of success with these younger players. And that's one of the things I think people get really wrong, is they think you need to get rid of those players to bring these young guys in and have them move forward. You want players like Bruno and Rashford and such, and Maguire even, who are taking the pressure on, and who are holding with what's going on, and relieving some of that burden, and providing, and can kind of drag you up the table like they have done. And like you see with the final against City, you have players who can do that. You have players who can drag the team forward, Lissandro Martinez, etc. And so it's a risk, but then there's also getting the blend right. And this is the way that they're doing it. And I mean, this is where they're going. Obviously we haven't been linked to there's not a single there's no secret giant deal for an Erling Haaland player or something like that coming in. And this is where they're at, and I hope it works out. It's risky. It's got the potential to not shortcut the whole thing, but to give you some longevity, I guess, if it does work out, where you do have players of the right age who are coming into their own, who are building, and you can progress forward. So it's got its pluses and minuses, but
Mm.
that's
To
what we're going to
me,
have to see.
you have to have a very clear identity. What are you trying to do? You're trying to be a club that develops players to sell them, or are you trying to win
Yeah.
trophies? If you're trying to
Yeah.
win trophies and you want to keep the Miners and you want to keep the Garnachos, because eventually they're going to
Yep.
be pursued by clubs that want to win trophies.
Yep.
You have to surround them with quality that can win trophies. I mean,
Yep.
3 or 4 years of getting your arse handed to City by City and Liverpool, it gets old after a while. I don't care whether you're
Mhm.
born and raised. If you were born in the halfway line at Old Trafford, eventually that gets old,
Mhm.
and players
Yep.
start looking elsewhere and going another rebuild. I mean, who's doing these rebuild? Boeing. I mean, every single time we do one, it falls apart, and you're going, and over this time it's going to work. Well, this time, but we're going to sign these players. Actually, we're not going to sign any of these players. We're going to sign players that you've barely heard of. But
Yeah.
you know what? We're going to unlock their potential. How long did we wait to unlock Pogba's potential? This guy's going to come unlock him. This is bullshit.
Mhm.
You get what you pay for,
Yep.
and yet if you want to get exceptional young players, you have to get them at a really young age. Once they get to 18, 19, 20, everybody knows about them.
Yep.
And the very best of those kids, you're not getting unless you're winning trophies. None Euro, for example.
Yep.
Now,
Yep.
United are not getting any Euro over this 15, 16-time European Cup winners.
Yeah, no
They're not
doubt.
even in the Champions League. The idea that some French kid's going to go, do you know what? I'm going to go to Old Trafford where, they toggle between one crisis to the next and turn down sitting on Real Madrid's bench.
Yep.
I mean, this is what I'm saying. So if you want to sign best young players, you now have to beat Real Madrid. You now have to beat City.
Yep.
You now have to beat Chelsea. You now have to go get them ahead of these clubs because they're so far advanced in those markets. You can't pick up a scraps that they don't want because then you're playing a different game. Okay, well, I'm just hoping this kid gets to get better so I can sell him 2 years from now. Okay, but that's what you are. So
Yep.
top players are not coming here, and if that's what United are trying to do, then the expectation has to be in line with that because
Mhm.
there's
Yep.
nobody competing for the league title, signing a couple of young French players.
For sure.
I don't care where you are in the league.
Yeah.
Arsenal had to recognize this with Arteta that unless we invest in genuine quality,
Yep.
right? This is you'll have one-off season here where you finish second, the dominoes fall into place properly, but it's not sustainable. They finished second. They went out and signed Declan Rice. They went out and
Yep.
signed Kai Havertz. They went out and spent a fortune that
Yep.
summer and said,
Yep.
we're not going to sell for this. We're not going to look to find just a couple of decent young players and maintain. They tried to push on and they almost won the league again. They maintained their position.
Yep.
There's no shortcuts to the top. You either do it right or you don't do it at all because you're not getting there through the back door. So this is where any of us have to acknowledge yes, environment is a big issue that has to be changed undoubtedly, but
Sure.
also you have to be competitive in regards to your quality in relation to your. I mean, United have got away with the fact that Garnacho didn't cost them a penny.
Mhm. Yep.
Kobe Manu didn't cost them a penny.
Yep.
They can make pure profit on Mason Greenwood, didn't cost them a penny. Marcus Rashford didn't cost them a penny. I mean, in key positions where some of United's best players are, didn't cost them anything. So
Yep.
I think it's reasonable to expect genuine investment in other positions that the academy hasn't covered. We can't keep looking to young Harry Amas to fill left back position. We can't keep this is just not realistic. They're going to
Mhm.
have to invest in legitimate quality if they want to seriously compete.
Yeah. Well, they will, and I think that it's just not going to be this window that they're making those big moves. On the Rice and Havertz and that kind of money.
But how do you ever
Um,
get there then?
well, I mean, Arsenal put themselves back up into the Champions League places on mostly young players and people who, by buying pretty smart when Arteta joined, they sold a lot of seniors. They brought in a lot of people that I think maybe it's a similar. I'm not saying it works every time, but it is a pretty similar route. When they bought in like a Zinchenko and a Saliba, he was on 2 years. He was on loan for 2 years. Prior to this, and until they brought in, I think Odegaard was a loan from Madrid at the time, a young player who hadn't actually kicked on and been successful, and they built a good team out of that. That they then added on really big spending. And to be fair, they needed that. You do have to take that step, and they still didn't win a title. And they still haven't won any trophies.
So think about
So
how far they still haven't won anything, and
yeah,
United are expecting to compete with City at a fraction of that spending.
but they're not gonna compete with City. I mean, it's just the reality of it. It's gonna be some time before that happens,
But I
and I
just
think
don't
they know that.
I just don't understand how you can accumulate an advantage where, okay, next season we'll have more money to spend, and eventually we'll get there, and then
Hmm.
sit down with someone like Bruno Fernandes and go, look, man, we're 3 years away before we can even compete with them on the pitch
Well,
in the
I, I
league.
I know, and I
I'm
don't know
out.
how you solve that either, because I had the exact same concern with the whole Bruno thing that came up. Because yes, he wants a new contract. Money can sometimes solve these things, right? He wants a new contract, but of course, a big part of that is wanting to see United competitive, like you said, matching his ambitions and all that. And that
It's
was
not
my
just
concern.
Bruno, as we know, James. It's not
I
just
know,
him
I
making these
know. And,
questions.
and I look at that, and he's the best player in the higher age range, because he's a few years older than Rashford. But Maguire's 31. That's why I think he'll probably move, or he's 30. But I know, and those were my questions, because when I looked at the plan that was shaping up for the summer, it was obvious to me that this was what was going to happen. Young players. We talked about that months ago, right? But then you look at that and you say, how does that work with Bruno? Because it is going to take 3 years. I mean, they're not competing with City now. They're going to be competing with Aston Villa and Newcastle and Chelsea to get into those top four spots. That's the reality of where we are. Now you might be able to win things like the cups. You might be able to win a Europa League, because your biggest competition in the Europa League right now is Tottenham. So that's your competition this year. You know what I mean? They haven't really replaced Harry Kane as of yet. But I look at that and I think that is the reality. But yeah, that's why I was looking at it and saying I think there are chances for players like Bruno to leave, because are they going to want to wait 3 years to be competitive? And what kind of player is he going to be in 3 years? He's going to feel like he can even contribute to the highest level then. I don't know. Is Rashford going to want to stay 3 years? And again, I know some people would be happy to move both of these players on. I think it'd be a big mistake at this point in
Anyone that's
time.
happy to move Bruno Fernandes on is thinking that
Yeah.
real life's like a computer game. I'm
And so
sorry,
these are
you know
yeah,
absolutely fucking nothing about football. Absolutely nothing.
I
Bruno
know, and I
Fernandes is
understand, and
exactly the thing I'm talking about, between the balance between providing young players with legitimate quality.
yeah,
This
yes,
is not a computer game. They don't just automatically, incrementally get better
correct,
because you play them every week. Okay,
correct.
so this idea that you need to, I mean, I've been watching João Neves. João Neves is nowhere near the level of Bruno Fernandes.
Mm-mm,
People, oh, let's
not even
sell
close.
Bruno and we'll buy João and
I
everything will
know,
be.
I know.
I mean, this is insane. Right, I
Yep,
understand that Football Manager leads into these fantasies of building teams with young players, and it's all, but this is not real. That doesn't. It's not
yeah,
commensurate with real life. Getting rid of a
yeah,
Bruno Fernandes would be an absolute catastrophe. And by the
yeah.
way, world class teams that want to win leagues don't do that. Look how long City
Hmm.
held on to David Silva for when they folded.
Yeah, I know,
Right?
I
Look
know.
how long they held on to Fernandinho for. Right?
Yeah.
If you're a genuine class player
I
at a
mean, look
top,
at Madrid. Look at
yeah,
Modric.
look
How long
at
he's and Cruz is retiring there. You know.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
When you're a world class team that want to win trophies,
yeah,
you don't look at resale value. You don't go, oh, you know what? Uh, he's reaching 29, need to sell him. Well, he's world class, but I don't care about that. We just sell him. Okay, what game
yeah,
are you playing here? Because if you want to win
yeah.
trophies, that has the first principle has to be everything. The whole definition of success of this football club is winning trophies. If it's making money, then the reverse happens. Then we sell the player, because that is everything's derivative of that.
Yep.
So to me, I mean, I think about how many players United, if they had that mentality in years gone by, and great teams that have won, were selling 29-year-olds because of the resale value of it, players that United would
Hmm.
never have seen. And I think this is a real problem with anyone that thinks that losing probably one of the only, maybe a couple of players on the cusp of world class that
Yeah.
would walk into City's team,
Yeah.
would walk into the Real Madrid team, all these teams. He's that good that
Yeah.
you would want to sell him. Have you seen the absolute shit that we just watched this season?
Yep.
And you want to downgrade? Because I don't care if you get rid of Bruno Fernandes, you are not signing anyone in the market of that level, because they don't want to come to United. They're already at top clubs. It's
Yeah.
insane to me that anyone would even
Yeah.
think that's a sensible idea.
No, I'm with you, and I agree in that these are the things you're gonna have to be building, and you need those types of players to build it. But I have that same concern, and that's up to them to sort out.
Mm.
To Ashworth and Wilcox and them to sit down and explain the plan to Bruno. There's talks with multiple players in the next week, because there's a lot of senior players right now who are not on who are on normal break and are set to return on
Mm-hmm.
the 8th, including Marcus Rashford, including Harry Maguire, including Scott McTominay. These are senior players, homegrown players. Two of them have been at the club since they were kids, and then there'll be more with Bruno and such later. But to talk about their futures and to clarify it, and I think you can lose some players on good value, but not a lot, not as many as you think when you're trying to build up a young team for sure. And but these are the exact conversations they're going to want to have. They're going to sit down and say, what are we doing next year? What is happening? Where are
Yep.
we going? And to feel comfortable with that at United, and to not waste the rest of to feel like they're going to waste the rest of the best parts of their career there. And that conversation is going to have to be had with every player. I mean, Lissandro Martinez, for example, I know for certain that he had serious concerns after joining United about how things have been going the last few years. I'm not saying he was asking to leave or wanted to go or anything like that, but he had serious concerns, and those concerns start to show up, and it start to exacerbate the longer that they go on. And I think he's a player who feels more confident about where things are going, but he's also going to want to know, what are we doing to
Of course.
strengthen this? Rafael Varane is gone. We had the best record of any United pairing in 10 years with us together. He's gone. Who's coming in? And how's that going to work? And how is that going to play? And how are we going to improve upon what we had with that partnership? Those are things that every one of these players is going to want to know, senior and the best players at United. And those are the things that they're going to have answers for. And I think that you can get some time as new owners, and you can get some time as new appointments, but there is the risk involved, because you can't be bad this year. That's a fact, right? You
We have to be
cannot be
better.
bad this season. Yeah, we have to be better. There has to be a progression. And I think, frankly, since you've won trophies, and that's the reason Ten Hag is staying, and that's the reason you're in the Europa League, I think you got to win it, quite honestly. Like, I think if you don't win a trophy this season, it's a problem for a lot of players. It's going to be a
Sure.
disappointment.
The only way that expectation is realistic to me depends upon what Ineos do this summer. They have to
Yeah.
make sure that the next time they sit down with Ten Hag and evaluate him, they've removed every excuse possible for failure.
Yeah. Sure.
Because Francis scored. If well, no, who's that?
The
Was it Toronto?
Toronto scored?
Yeah,
That's what I thought it was.
really.
Yeah.
Sorry, but they have to make sure that they remove every excuse possible
Yeah.
for Ten Hag, so that when he sits down with them, whenever in the winter or next summer, goes, yeah, but this is still broken. This is still broken. This
Yeah.
is the. Any else's job is to make sure that those things don't exist, so that they can properly evaluate him.
Yep.
So, if you want to build a team around young players and be successful, you have to get the best young players in the world, not
Mm,
the third or fourth, fifth ones that other top clubs have looked at and said no thanks.
yep.
So, to me, United aren't even there yet,
Mhm.
and they've never been able to get the Jude Bellinghams, the Erling Haalands, the
Yeah.
type of players you need to sign if you're going to build around young players. Okay. They
Yep.
still, the Lana Euros, all this. These are the players you have to get. You can't do that by bringing in, players that, are 19, 20 that are on the fringes of RB Leipzig or something. I'm sorry.
Right.
So,
Yep.
a lot of work to be done.
Yep.
And let me just
Colomwani
say
was who scored. Colomwani was the one who scored.
let me just say this when it comes to Ineos, so I don't get a bunch of abuse. I'm extremely optimistic that they're there, and that
Yeah.
I think this is the best position United have been in since 2005. And I know United have had success since then, obviously, but I'm talking about
As a club, yeah.
finally there is some alignment between people that own the football club and people who play for the football club in terms of goals. And they will
Yep.
eventually structure an incentive and consequence reward program and system inside the football club that gets people working towards the same collective goal. Every single thing inside United is geared towards individual goals. And this is eventually what you
Yeah.
get. And that's how people are incentivized. Anything else will change that structure. And it will take time.
Yep.
But if they don't build right this summer, then they're going to have to redo it again next summer. This is
Mhm.
where the foundations are laid.
Yep.
And any of us don't have a year to waste, because the goodwill towards them will turn fast. So it's very important, in my opinion, once, if it's Dan Ashworth or Omar Baratic, sits down and does a very clear, precise interview, it sets expectations. It says, this is what we're up
Yep.
against. This is what we're trying to do, so that it makes sense to people. They
Yep.
have to communicate. And United fans are forgiven if you turn around and say, look, the football club's in a financial mess. We just don't have the ability to bet the top of market. We're going to have to, you're going to be a bit more patient. We're going to do this, do that. Okay.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah,
that's the message they do have to put out,
yeah.
because if they're transparent about it, it will be acceptable to people. The
But
communication is key on this.
one of
Yeah.
the reasons why it's very important, James, is you cannot have the media going after United managers who are failing to win the league, or
Yeah.
because they're not competing. Well, hold on a minute. We're not expecting that from him right now. So
Yeah.
any of us can't allow weeks and weeks and weeks of speculation about Ten Hag being torn apart over whenever they have,
And they have their
you
own
know,
measure of what
whenever
it's yeah.
they are not
Yeah.
expecting that from him.
Yes.
They have to
Yeah.
be the ones that set expectation and say,
Correct.
this is what, this is the line of failure, and this is the line of success, so
Yep.
that the expectation around him, is legit, or any United manager for that reason.
Yep.
So I think that's something that they're going to have to do. But
Sure.
look, as I said, I'm optimistic. United have needed this for a long time, and it's unthinkable where United would be if they didn't get some type of new ownership.
Yep. There's no doubt. I mean, financially and everything, I don't think they would have survived, quite frankly. So
I can't even imagine
yeah.
what United would be this summer without that. But nonetheless,
Yep.
all right, matey. I will talk to you later, my man. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Sounds
I'm
good.
sure there'll be a lot happening between now and next week. So I'm sure you'll be recording before then. I'll probably bang something out before then too.
Yep.
You and I'll be back next week.
Sounds
Happy
good.
4th of July, mate. Take it easy.
Yes, and to everybody else who's listening as well, enjoy your week.
Cheers, folks. See ya.